My brother's new wife whispered at the reception, "He's just here for show. We don't need his money." They did, though. I froze the wedding fund I'd contributed to, and the vendors started packing up early. I, 32M, watched my brother's wedding reception unravel in real time, and I felt absolutely nothing. The venue was one of those converted barns that tried too hard to look rustic. Exposed beams, string lights, mason jars everywhere. My younger brother had spent months planning this day, and I'd helped make it happen. Not just emotionally, but financially. When he'd asked for help 6 months ago, his voice had been desperate. The girl he loved came from a family that expected a certain level of wedding, and he was drowning in debt from his failed startup. I'd written a check for $40,000. Not a loan, a gift, because that's what older brothers do. I was standing near the bar when I overheard her. The bride. She was huddled with 2 of her bridesmaids, champagne flutes in hand, makeup perfect. I'd stepped away to take a work call and came back to grab my drink. They didn't see me behind the flower arrangement. One of the bridesmaids had asked about me, wondered if I was single. The bride had laughed, a sharp sound that didn't match her soft wedding aesthetic. She'd said I was just here for show, that they didn't need my money. Her friends had giggled, and she'd continued, saying my brother had only involved me to keep up appearances with his side of the family. That I was too uptight, too boring, too concerned with numbers and spreadsheets to understand what real connection meant. I'd stood there, my phone still in my hand from the call, and felt something cold settle in my chest. The thing about being the responsible one, the stable one, the one everyone calls when they need something. You get used to being underestimated. You get used to being the backup plan, the safety net, the boring necessity. But you also learn exactly how much power you actually hold. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. The wedding vendors, the caterer, the DJ, the photographer, the florist, they'd all required 50% up front. The remaining balances, totaling about $38,000, were supposed to be paid at the end of the night. My brother had the card I'd given him, linked to an account I'd set up specifically for wedding expenses. I'd deposited $50,000 total, telling him to use whatever he needed. I froze the account with 3 taps. Then I went back to my table and waited. The cake cutting happened. The first dance. The toasts. I gave mine, keeping it short and sweet, talking about childhood memories and wishing them happiness. My brother had hugged me, eyes wet. The bride had smiled at me, that practiced wedding day smile that looked perfect in photos. Dinner was served around 8. Prime rib and salmon, plated beautifully. The caterer had done an excellent job. I ate slowly, watching people enjoy themselves, watching my brother glow with happiness. Around 9:30, I saw the catering manager approach the head table. She'd leaned down to speak quietly with my brother. His face had changed, confusion replacing joy. He'd pulled out his phone, then the card I'd given him. He'd tried to hand it to her, but she'd shaken her head and walked away. Within 10 minutes, the DJ's music had gotten quieter. The photographer had started packing equipment. My brother had stood up, now looking panicked. The bride's smile had finally cracked. I'd watched my brother rush around, phone pressed to his ear, probably calling his bank. The card would show declined. The account would show frozen. He'd tried calling me, but I was sitting right there at table 6, phone face down, eating wedding cake. The venue coordinator had appeared, clipboard in hand, face apologetic but firm. I'd seen her explaining something to my brother, gesturing to her watch. The bride had joined them, her voice rising enough that nearby tables had started to notice. Her father had gotten involved, red-faced and blustering. But the contracts were clear, final payment due at event conclusion or services would cease. By 10:15, the string lights were coming down. My brother had finally spotted me and rushed over. His eyes were desperate, asking what was happening, begging me to help. I'd looked at him calmly and asked what he meant. He'd explained the card wasn't working, the account was frozen, the vendors were leaving. Could I please fix this? His wedding was being dismantled around him. I'd taken a sip of my whiskey and told him I'd frozen the account myself about 2 hours ago. The color had drained from his face. He'd asked why, voice barely a whisper. I'd glanced at the bride, who'd followed him over, and told him I'd overheard an interesting conversation earlier. That I was apparently just here for show. That my money wasn't needed. The bride's face had gone white under her makeup. My brother had looked between us, trying to understand. I'd stood up, straightened my jacket, and said if my presence and contribution were just for appearances, then there was no point in continuing the charade. I'd wished them both a lovely evening and headed for the exit. Behind me, I'd heard the bride trying to explain, her voice high and panicked. My brother's response had been quieter, harder to make out. Other guests had started noticing the vendors packing up, the lights going down, the festive atmosphere evaporating. I'd made it to my car when my phone had started ringing. My brother. I let it go to voicemail. Then the bride's number. Voicemail. Her father. Voicemail. My brother's best man, probably trying to mediate. Voicemail. I'd driven home, poured another drink, and sat on my deck looking at the city lights. The voicemails piled up. The first few from my brother were confused, hurt, begging me to explain what he'd done wrong. Then angry ones from the bride's father, threatening legal action for breach of verbal contract. Then desperate ones from the bride herself, saying it was just girl talk, just blowing off steam. She didn't mean anything by it. Around midnight, my brother had sent a text saying the venue had kicked everyone out. The reception had ended before 11. No dancing, no send-off, no final moments. Just confused guests filing out while vendors loaded trucks and the bride cried in the bathroom. I'd slept fine. Update 1. The fallout started the next morning. My phone had 17 missed calls by the time I woke up at 7. My brother had sent a long text around 3 in the morning, clearly written while drunk or emotionally destroyed, or both. It rambled between apologizing for whatever he'd done, defending his wife, and calling me cruel and heartless. He'd said I'd ruined the most important day of his life over something his wife had said in private, that I was petty and controlling and had always needed to be the center of attention. That last part almost made me laugh. I'd made coffee and read through the messages. The bride's mother had somehow gotten my number and left a voicemail calling me vindictive and small. Several cousins had texted asking what happened. The family group chat had exploded with speculation. I'd muted it all and gone for a run. By noon, my mother called. I'd answered because ignoring her would only make things worse. She'd asked, voice tight, what had happened at the wedding. I told her exactly what I'd overheard and exactly what I'd done. There'd been a long silence. Then she'd said the bride was young and stupid and said things she didn't mean, and did I really need to destroy my brother's wedding over it? I'd asked her if she thought it was acceptable for someone to take $40,000 from me while mocking me behind my back. She'd said that wasn't the point. The wedding was already paid for. The damage was done to my wallet either way. So why did I need to humiliate them publicly? I'd explained the remaining $38,000 hadn't been paid yet, that I'd saved myself that money at least. She'd gone quiet again, then said she didn't raise me to be so cold. That family meant forgiveness. I told her family also meant respect, and hung up. The bride's father called that afternoon, voice controlled but seething underneath. He'd informed me that I'd embarrassed his family in front of 200 people, that his daughter's wedding photos would forever be incomplete because the photographer had left early, that the memory of that day was now tainted. He'd said he was consulting with lawyers about recovering damages. I told him good luck proving a verbal gift agreement in court and ended the call. My brother showed up at my apartment around 6 that evening. I'd buzzed him up because avoiding him forever wasn't realistic. He'd looked wrecked, eyes red, still in his wedding clothes minus the jacket and tie. He'd asked if we could talk. I'd let him in. He'd sat on my couch and put his head in his hands. For a long moment, he hadn't said anything. Then he'd asked why I hadn't just pulled him aside, why I'd chosen public humiliation, why I'd punished 200 innocent people for something his wife had said. I'd sat across from him and explained that I'd considered pulling him aside. But then I'd realized that if I had, he would have smoothed it over. He would have made excuses for her, convinced me it was just wedding stress, promised it would never happen again. The party would have continued, my money would have funded it, and nothing would have actually changed. She would have learned that disrespecting me had no consequences. He'd argued that she was sorry, that she'd already apologized a dozen times, that she was mortified. I'd asked if she was sorry she said it or sorry she got caught. He'd hesitated, and I'd had my answer. He'd switched tactics then. Reminded me of when we were kids, when our father left, and I'd stepped up to help our mom raise him. How I'd paid for his college textbooks, helped him move apartments, been there for every major moment. He'd said he loved me and couldn't understand why I'd throw away our relationship over his wife's stupid comment. I told him I wasn't throwing anything away. He was welcome in my life anytime. But his wife had made clear how she viewed me, and I wasn't interested in being around someone who saw me as a prop. The money I'd already spent was gone, fine. But I wasn't spending another dollar or another moment of energy on someone who'd mock me for providing it. He'd asked what he was supposed to do now. The honeymoon was booked, the bills were piling up, and he was exactly where he'd started 6 months ago, broke and overwhelmed. I'd shrugged and said he should ask his wife's family for help since they'd wanted such an expensive wedding. He'd said they'd already contributed what they could. I'd suggested they get jobs and pay it off together. He'd stood up then, face hardening, and said I'd changed. That the brother he grew up with wouldn't have done this. I'd walked him to the door and said maybe I'd just stopped letting people use me. He'd left without another word. Update 2. 3 weeks passed. Radio silence from my brother and his wife. My mother called twice more, trying to mediate, but I'd held firm. Either they acknowledged that what was said was unacceptable and genuinely apologized, or we had nothing to discuss. She'd stopped calling after that. Extended family fell into camps. Some thought I was justified. Others thought I'd overreacted. Holiday dinners were going to be awkward. Then my brother's best man reached out. We'd always gotten along. He was a straight shooter who didn't do drama. He'd asked to meet for drinks, and I'd agreed. We'd met at a sports bar on a Thursday night. He'd ordered us both beers and gotten straight to it. My brother was in bad shape. The wedding debt was crushing him. His wife blamed him for not managing me better. Their honeymoon had been canceled. They were fighting constantly. He'd asked if there was any path to reconciliation. I'd asked if the bride had actually acknowledged what she'd done. He'd sighed and said she maintained it was just venting, that everyone complains about in-laws, that I'd taken it too personally. I told him that answered my question. He'd nodded slowly, then said something that surprised me. He'd mentioned that he'd never liked the bride much, that she'd always seemed calculated, always concerned with appearances and status, that my brother had been different before her, more relaxed, more himself. But love made people stupid, and my brother was deeply stupid for this woman. I'd asked why he was telling me this. He'd said because my brother needed to hear hard truth from someone, and it clearly wasn't going to be his wife. That maybe hitting rock bottom financially would force my brother to evaluate his choices. We'd finished our beers, and he'd promised to keep me updated. 2 months after the wedding, my brother called. Not texted, actually called. I'd answered. His voice had been different. Tired but clear. He'd asked if we could meet. I'd agreed to coffee the next day. He'd shown up looking thinner, older somehow. We'd ordered, sat down, and he'd started talking. He'd said the last 2 months had been hell. The debt, the fighting, the realization that his wife's family had expectations he could never meet. That his wife had expectations he could never meet. That he'd been so focused on making her happy that he'd forgotten to question whether he was happy. I'd listened without interrupting. He'd said he'd been replaying the wedding night in his mind. Not just what I'd done, but everything leading up to it. How his wife had steamrolled every decision, insisting on expensive choices because that's what her friends were doing. How she'd dismissed his concerns about cost, saying it was one day and they deserved it. How she'd made him feel small for not being able to afford the life she wanted. He'd said that what she'd said about me, about us not needing my money, it wasn't an isolated comment. It was how she actually saw things. She'd convinced herself that the wedding would have happened regardless, that my contribution was just me showing off, not genuine help. That she'd rewritten reality to avoid feeling indebted to someone she considered beneath her social circle. I'd asked what he planned to do. He'd said he didn't know yet. Marriage counseling wasn't working because she didn't think she'd done anything wrong. Financial counseling had revealed just how deep the hole was. He'd taken a second job, and she'd complained he was never home. I'd asked the hard question then. Did he love her enough to live like this forever? He'd stared into his coffee for a long time before admitting he didn't know anymore. I told him that I wasn't punishing him, that I'd always be his brother. But I needed him to understand that respect wasn't optional, and I wouldn't accept people in my life who viewed me as a resource to exploit and then mock. That if he wanted a relationship with me, it couldn't include someone who demonstrated such contempt. He nodded and said he understood, that he needed time to figure things out. We'd parted with a hug, the first physical contact since the wedding. Update 3. The marriage lasted 8 more months. My brother filed for divorce the following summer. I'd heard about it through my mother, who'd called sounding relieved despite trying to hide it. Apparently, the bride had already moved on, dating someone from her social circle with family money. My brother had moved into a small apartment and was working steadily to pay down the debt. He'd call me a week after the divorce was finalized, asked if I wanted to grab dinner. I'd said yes. We'd gone to our old favorite diner, the kind with vinyl booths and unlimited coffee. He'd apologized properly this time, not for his ex-wife, but for his own blindness, for choosing to defend her instead of examining why I'd reacted so strongly, for letting himself become someone who prioritized appearances over substance, for taking me for granted. I'd accepted the apology. He'd asked if I'd known the marriage would fail. I'd told him honestly that I'd hoped it wouldn't, but I wasn't surprised it did. That anyone who starts a marriage by disrespecting family support probably isn't equipped to handle the actual hard parts of marriage. We talked for 3 hours. About his plans, his job, his goals. About what he wanted from life now that he wasn't trying to impress someone else. He'd seemed lighter than he had in years. As we'd left, he'd asked if I'd ever consider helping him financially again. I'd stopped walking and looked at him. He'd quickly added that he wasn't asking for money. He just wanted to know if I trusted him again. I'd thought about it and told him that trust wasn't about money, that I'd always help him if he genuinely needed it. But next time, he needed to have the self-respect to question why he needed help and whether he was making choices that aligned with his actual values. He'd smiled, a real smile, and said that sounded fair. 6 months later, we had Thanksgiving at my place. Just us, our mom, and a couple of close friends. Simple food, good conversation, no pretense. My brother had brought a bottle of wine and a card. Inside, he'd written that he was grateful for the lesson, even though it had been brutal to learn. That sometimes the people who love you most are the ones willing to let you fail. I'd kept the card. Looking back, I don't regret freezing that account. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that my brother had chosen someone who viewed generosity as weakness. But I don't regret enforcing my boundaries or refusing to fund my own disrespect. The bride's family never sued. My brother paid off the wedding debt over 2 years. We rebuilt our relationship slowly, with clear communication and mutual respect. He's dating someone now, someone who works as a teacher and thinks his second job shows character rather than inadequacy. I like her. Sometimes people ask if I'd have handled it differently. The answer is no, because the alternative was enabling behavior that would have only gotten worse. My brother needed to face the consequences of his choices, and his ex-wife needed to learn that actions have repercussions. I was never just there for show. I was there because family mattered to me. And the moment someone demonstrated that family didn't matter to them, I stopped pretending we were on the same page. The account is still frozen, actually. Empty now, closed officially, but I keep the final statement. A reminder that self-respect isn't negotiable, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to participate in your own diminishment. My brother understands that now. It cost him a marriage and 2 years of financial struggle, but he understands. And our relationship is stronger for it, built on honesty instead of obligation, respect instead of assumption. That's worth more than any wedding reception could ever be. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe button would mean the world to us.